Hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today for this session, Coping with Anxiety, which is so relevant in our times these days, um, especially because we can see how the anxiety has risen in a lot of people, and so have other mental health issues and anxiety disorders specifically. So, thank you so much again, extending a very warm welcome to everyone. Special thanks to the NSS team of IP University for giving me this opportunity to express my thoughts on this topic. So, let's get started. A few things to keep in mind before we move on. That this session consists of general information and advice. It is not meant for diagnosis and treatment purposes, even though some of us might feel that, yeah, I fit into this category or this is totally me. Just resist that urge because the purpose of this session is not that. Although you might be able to pick up skills that will be of use in your life, whether or not you are taking treatment, and whether or not you have been actually diagnosed with an anxiety disorder per se. We'll also cover when to take professional help, when is the time to kind of step out and take that help that is required. The most important thing that I'd like you to understand is that some of the things that you might see in this presentation, like I said, you might feel that this is me, these are the kind of thoughts I have, uh, and alike. Want you to really understand that you're not alone in this. Most of us go through these kind of experiences at some point in time. So you're actually not alone in this, and uh, I have myself worked on a lot of things that I'll be talking to you about today. And by all means, if you feel overwhelmed during this presentation, feel free to take a break and come back and join us whenever you're ready. And of course, this will be available on YouTube, so you can revisit this anytime. So, the most common psychological disorder, anxiety disorders. The World Health Organization says that 1 in 13 suffer from anxiety globally. Though I feel as though, because there are so many people who don't report these issues, I feel that the numbers could be way higher, maybe one every fourth or fifth person um, that I would meet has some kind of anxiety or fear in their life. So the trend is that that is rising. Okay, so we need to really look after ourselves and our loved ones better. Coming on to the signs and symptoms of anxiety. So anxiety is kind of a general umbrella term, and there are signs and symptoms that you can recognize within yourself and others as well. There are four kinds of signs and symptoms, and we'll be talking about all of them today. One is physical, so racing heart, breathlessness, sweaty palms, blood pressure changes, trembling, GI problems, meaning irritable tummy, tension in body, twitching meaning involuntary movements that one can't seem to control in the body. Headaches and exhaustion are some of the signs that could be because of anxiety. Emotional, meaning feeling worried, stressed, nervous, fearful, apprehensive, tensed. Another sign is cognitive, which means stuff that is happening in the mind. Racing thoughts, negative thoughts like what if this happens, what if that happens, almost like a danger or a misfortune waiting to happen. So thoughts about that. Even trouble concentrating could be a sign of anxiety. Intrusive, uncontrollable thoughts, meaning repetitive. Intrusive, meaning stuff that I don't want. Uncontrollable, that give us a sense of this is just beyond my control. And behavioral, so pacing up and down, doing tasks in a hurry, being startled easily, like something very small happens and you get this easily startling response. Insomnia, which is difficulty sleeping. Avoidance of things, people, situations, or thoughts that are triggers, that could be triggers. So these are the four categories of signs and symptoms. Now reflect for a second and just see which ones are the most easy to identify out of these four. So I'm guessing most of us would have chosen behavioral, which is kind of true because most of the times we are unable to access what is going on. If you observe somebody, we don't know what's going on inside, right? So behaviorally, we might be able to see and guess what could be happening. Moving on to why these symptoms happen. Why are these symptoms characteristic of anxiety? Now, one of the ways that we understand anxiety is that the body prepares for danger or threat, whether it is a real threat or whether it is a perceived, meaning whether my mind is telling me that there is a threat, even if it's not a real threat. So the primitive biological response to danger are basically, I'm sure you would have heard of fight versus flight response. So there's another category called the freeze response as well. So what happens is that when we are faced with danger, our minds want to protect us, right? So all the blood flow basically goes to our muscles uh, for us to prepare for either a fight, if we can, if we have the power to fight the threat, or flee the situation if I feel that I possibly cannot fight this threat, or freezing meaning immobilizing. A lot of us have that experience, when we are severely anxious, like don't know what to do. It's like a frozen moment in time. So these are the primitive biological response to danger that helps us survive. Now, the reason why it is primitive is because this response is very useful in certain situations, or used to be useful, like like being chased by a tiger, or if there's a cyclone in the picture. So that really helps us to get prepared. um, However, these kind of situations are not an everyday occurrence, right? We are not living in the jungle anymore. So in some situations this can be very adaptive and useful, whereas in most situations it might not be, and it might just be an overreaction of the nervous system. Especially I want to give you some information about the freeze response. So what happens in some fish is that they freeze because the predator detects the prey by movement. So if their eyesight is not very good, that is what they will do. They will use the movement of the prey to locate the their meal. So these tiny little fish, what they would do is they would freeze in that moment. So that helps their chances of survival, and that happens in humans as well. The freezing kind of response. Like I said, these responses are useful in certain situations, whereas in most situations, they are kind of an overreaction of the body, really, a learned reaction, if I were to put it that way. Let's move on to some types of anxiety disorders. Now, the reason why I want to share this information is with you is not because I want you to diagnose yourself or other people who, who might have some anxiety. Uh, but I guess the main reason is for us to understand that there could be a lot of behaviors that we might see in certain people or in ourselves that might have anxiety as an underlying cause. Now, when we just look at a behavior, sometimes it's very easy to judge, to get judgmental about why is this person doing like this, why that is so abnormal, and you know or for us, why do I do like this? I know that I don't want to, but still I end up doing that. Now, the the underlying cause could be anxiety. So, not diagnosis, but a better understanding of some things that are some behaviors that have the cause anxiety beneath them. um, Obsessive compulsive disorder is one of the very common anxiety disorders. Now, the main hallmark of a OCD is basically getting repetitive, uncontrollable, intrusive thoughts, which are called obsessions, followed by some behavior, which is called compulsion. For example, an obsession could be um, fear of germs. So, a corresponding compulsion could be repetitive hand washing, right? So, you might be able to just observe you might see that a person is washing their hands repeatedly, or touching objects repeatedly, or aligning objects repeatedly. And the cause is actually anxiety, is those obsessions that the person cannot, uh, control. So that's OCD. Specific phobias are basically um, anxiety of specific places, objects, or even people for that matter. So the person has this specific anxiety, extreme anxiety towards, excessive anxiety towards this particular object, and avoids those experiences repeatedly. In generalized anxiety disorder, you might find some people um, who worry a lot. So every little thing is is worrisome for them, and that could be because of a generalized anxiety disorder. It's like pervasive in most areas of their life. In panic disorder, what happens is that you get anxiety attacks, which is like short bursts of anxiety which could last between anywhere between 5 minutes to half an hour to maybe even up to an hour for some people. So it's like a curve. The anxiety rises and goes down, and it could happen seemingly without any trigger. Okay, that's panic disorder. In social anxiety, the hallmark feature is the fear of being judged or being negatively evaluated by others, which eventually leads to an avoidance of situations where there is an interaction with others, or a possibility that I will be judged negatively. So that's social anxiety. Now, some of the personality disorders that have anxiety as their base is obsessive compulsive personality disorder, in which basically the person will be preoccupied with details, rules, lists, order, organization. There will be a lot of perfectionism in tasks. There would also be perhaps an excessive devotion to work at the cost of enjoying leisure activities, because for this person, leisure activities become like a competitive thing. Also there could be a difficulty in delegating tasks. There could be an issue with miserly spending, and a lot of rigid and stubbornness for their own routine and patterns. Um, that is OCPD. Another kind of personality disorder could be anxious avoidant. So imagine a person who's very, very shy, who doesn't have many friends, and is very reserved, does not like to talk to other people, internally wants to talk to other people and you know develop relationships, but anxiety interferes in that, is easily embarrassed, seldom takes any new chances or implements any new ideas, and feels very inadequate within oneself, and has a kind of a very poor self image about oneself, and perhaps is also very overly sensitive to other people's comments, and is very, very easily hurt by others. So these are some features of some types of anxiety disorders, and of course not everybody has all the symptoms. So there could be like different permutations and combinations of symptoms. So again, this is just for our understanding, so that when we observe certain behaviors within ourselves and others, we kind of get a sense of what could be going on inside. So some people repeatedly ask this question, why me, why did I get this anxiety disorder, why do I have this kind of anxiety? Now the reasons could be either genetic, biological, which means that the brain has an underproduction of certain neurotransmitters, or there's some chemical imbalance in the brain that needs to be fixed. Environmentally as well, trauma, any kind of trauma or traumatic life experiences can become um, you know a trigger for anxiety disorders. Uh, Also beliefs that we pick up within a family or within other social systems, beliefs about ourselves, beliefs about the world, beliefs about anxiety itself, um, can be one of the contributing factors to anxiety. We can't really pinpoint one cause, this is why I have this. It's kind of impossible to do that, just like diabetes, like it can have, there could be a little bit of genetic history, a little bit of lifestyle issue, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. So, and it's kind of futile exercise to trying to locate one reason why this happened to me. Now, the role of thoughts is very, very important in understanding and overcoming anxiety, because any situation, if there's any situations, our a situation, our response, which means our feelings and behavior, is determined by our thoughts and the way we interpret the situation. It's and these thoughts and interpretations are shaped by our beliefs or past experiences. For example, if I see a rope in my room right now and I get very anxious about it. So, situation is seeing a rope, response is feeling anxious, and I get up and I try to escape. That is the behavior. Now, this could be because I've had a past experience of seeing a snake in my room. Okay, so that's the past experience that I've had. And the thoughts that I have in this particular situation is, oh, it's a snake, oh, it's gonna bite me. This is a dangerous situation. So, hope this makes sense. So, any situation happens, the response, which is the feeling or the behavior, is mediated by our thoughts and interpretation of the situation. If I were to, okay, before I move on to talking a bit more about beliefs, If you'd like to know more about the nature of our mind and different kind of thoughts, please see Choosing Calm Over Chaos, which is the session one in in this series, and the link has been given in the description of this video. So that has a bit more information if you are interested about the nature of our mind, which could be helpful with anxiety as well. Now, beliefs. What are beliefs? If I were to put it in a dramatic way, beliefs are like wearing sunglasses. Yeah, different kind of sunglasses, different colors of sunglasses. So it's like I could have a belief wearing a sunglass that the world is a dangerous place. So what I am seeing is colored by that belief, if that makes sense. So, one person could be wearing pink colored sunglasses and the other person could be wearing purple colored sunglasses. And this is what they are seeing. Does not mean that there is right or wrong. The way we view this world is the because of the kind of beliefs or the sunglasses that we are wearing. And sometimes we are not even aware that we are wearing these sunglasses, or these are the beliefs that I'm carrying. It's almost like a kind of a automatic process. And sometimes we think that how can this other person think like this? How can they even uh, have a thought like that? And the answer to that is very simple, because they are wearing different colored sunglasses. Yeah. So, and there could be, very, very unique permutations and combinations of the sunglasses. So, everybody has a unique pair of glasses on their eyes, if you look at it that way. So, that's the role of beliefs. We we when we wake up in the morning, we are already wearing those glasses, walking around and looking at situations, doing our things without realizing that we are wearing these. Yeah. So unless I actively am aware of these and I choose to pick up another pair, that is going to be my vision. Moving on to some thought patterns or beliefs that maintain anxiety. So you might be able to recognize some of these things that some of the beliefs and thoughts that you might have, and that would actually be a very good thing, because once we are aware, it's easier to kind of let go and try a different pair. So the first one is, and before this, so these are all overlapping. They are not mutually exclusive categories. So the examples can fit in a lot of different thought patterns as well. Magnifying is when we magnify one part of the situation, like for example, flaws or problems, or when we magnify other people's qualities and we minimize our own. That this other person, they are such good speakers, they are amazing speakers, but me. So magnifying other people's good qualities and minimizing one's own. For example, if I'm giving a speech, and some parts are really good and some parts I fumble and are not very good. Now, if I if I focus my attention on only those parts that are not good and ignore all the other parts, then I'm magnifying. Okay, and that of course would make me feel more anxious. So that's magnifying. All or none thinking, which means that thinking that everything is either good or bad, or right versus wrong, or black or white. Now, what we have to realize is that every situation has shades of gray. That's not white and black. That's not how life works. Most situations have something good about it, and and something maybe a little bad about it. So, viewing the world as, or the situations as, this or that is all or none thinking. For example, if something, a very little thing happens, and I kind of decide that, oh, this is a good day, or this is a bad day. So categorizing days in in this way can be very unhelpful, and can cause us to feel more anxious. Yeah, because the truth is that every day there might be some good things and there might be some not so good things. Another example is, for example, you send a message to somebody and you don't get a response. So, all or none thinking in this matter would be, she either hates me or didn't get my message. Now, we are ignoring all the other possibilities that could happen. Maybe she's not feeling well, or maybe, she did see my message but got busy. So, all these kind of possibilities. So, that's all or none thinking. Why me attitude? Why does everything has to happen with me? I only have to suffer. So that also kind of maintains our anxiety, because then we are like, we become victim of our own beliefs, and we get caught up in that cycle. So we have to kind of at some stage realize that, look, it's not that I'm not alone in this. A lot of other people also go through this. It's not like I'm I'm being punished, or there is a conspiracy against me. So that's a why me attitude. Catastrophizing, we all, I think, are aware of how our minds can love to catastrophize. For example, preparing for an exam. If I'm preparing for an exam, and I'm slightly behind schedule, now my mind might say that, oh, I'm going to fail, my life is ruined. The fact is that I'm only a little behind schedule, but my mind exaggerates, and there is no limit to which our minds can actually catastrophize, and that can maintain a lot of anxiety. For example, in a panic attack, one might interpret a little bit of chest pain or a little bit of palpitations as a sign of heart attack. Yeah, so the tendency to blow circumstances out of proportion is catastrophizing. Jumping to conclusions, which means not taking into account other explanations. For example, you smile at someone, they don't return your smile and they just walk away. Mind gives the conclusion, she dislikes me, he dislikes me. Now, there could be other explanations for that behavior. Maybe that person was very engrossed in their own self, and maybe that person was actually very upset and was not even looking at you. Maybe they didn't even see you. So, that is jumping to conclusions. Always mentality. Having thoughts like, I always do this, I'm always anxious in this situation, they are always like this to me, it always happens like this when I do this. So whenever this shows up, always, that means that we are setting up for an anxiety trap, okay, which can maintain anxiety. Labeling, which means giving myself, others, or the world a label. For example, if I label myself as an anxious person, that can also be an unhelpful kind of a belief, because then I'm not, I'm kind of sticking to that label, and everything that happens comes in that label. Yeah. So another example is, if I label that the world is a dangerous place and I've convinced myself, then the way that I view this world would be always looking out for danger. Yeah. So that is labeling. Filtering, which means that the mind that is always searching for negative and disqualify the positives. For example, if I get a good feedback for a task or an assignment that I have done, yeah, and after getting the good feedback, I'm like, no, no, it was my luck, or the teacher's mood was like that, or it's everybody must have gotten a good score or something on those lines. So what we are doing is, I have an evidence that this is actually good, but I'm disqualifying that, and I'm trying to look for other explanations. So that is filtering. Fortune telling, which means that we like to become what do you say, fortune tellers, and predict negative outcomes without realistically considering the actual odds. So for example, if my chances of failing a particular exam is like 10%, my mind would exaggerate it and say it's actually 90%. Yeah, so if we are constantly predicting, that means that we are actually trying to fit a role of fortune teller, which may not be true and which may not be very helpful, because no one really can predict accurately what the chances of a negative outcome will be. So these are some of the examples of fortune telling. Emotional reasoning, very important. Example, I am feeling anxious, hence something bad is going to happen. Basing our understanding of a particular situation, basing that on the way I'm feeling. Now I could be feeling anxious because of 1,000 different reasons, but interpreting that as I'm feeling this, so something like, I'm sure something like this will happen. I feel like I will have a panic attack if I go out, so that must be actually true, right? So that is emotional reasoning, and that might not be accurate, and hence that is the reason why it kind of maintains anxiety. Personalizing, which means that taking everything in a direct or a personal way. Like, if somebody says something which is not meant to be taken personally, then also we take something personally. If that happens, then we also might be comparing ourselves with other people's, trying to determine who is better, who's smarter looking. That is personalizing. Even if it's not meant for us, we take it as something personal. Or it also could be the tendency to take the blame for absolutely everything that goes wrong in our life. Ki I am only the problem. That is personalizing, which is of course an unhelpful way of looking at things, because like I said, there are a combination of factors that lead to certain outcomes. Mind reading. So when we assume that we know that what the other person is thinking, like for instance, I'm 100% sure that this person is thinking negatively about me. It's absolutely impossible to know. That's the reality. you know the other person could be thinking about their own stuff, and their own issues. That could be the reality. Of course, there's a chance that this person could be thinking negatively, but then uh, it's really impossible to know, and it's very unhelpful to mind read. If you're constantly trying to mind read, oh, what does this person think, I'm sure this person thinks like that. That can maintain anxiety. Overgeneralization, which means that we predict the outcome of something based on one previous instance. For example, I go for a job interview, don't get the job, and I overgeneralize, I'm never going to get a job, and feel hopeless about it, right? So that is overgeneralization. Or for instance, if I interact with somebody from a different ethnic group, you know, I might say, oh, these kind of people are like this, based on one person's behavior, which might not be accurate. That is overgeneralization, and again, very unhelpful. Um, shoulding and musting, which means putting unrealistic and unreasonable demands on myself and others. Like, for instance, I must do this perfectly, or I must not get anxious. I must make sure that nobody sees that I'm anxious. What will that do? That will make me even more anxious. Yeah. So when the mind makes statements like this, it could have another language to it, right? That's when it becomes very unhelpful. Overthinking. Sometimes we feel that if we overthink a problem, if we overthink about a situation in our life, we are problem solving. That's actually quite inaccurate, because it's an unhelpful trap that I can get stuck in, right? So problem solving does not necessarily mean you have to overthink. It actually means that you have to have a calm mind to generate effective solutions. So this belief can be unhelpful in maintaining anxiety. Ki, if I don't overthink, how am I going to solve the problem? Another unhelpful belief is anxiety helps me in preparation. I'm not saying that this belief is wrong. That's not the question, that these beliefs are wrong or right. The question is, how is this unhelpful? Let me give you an example. For example, I'm very anxious about a meeting, okay, and the meeting goes very well. Now, what my mind could interpret this as is that my mind might believe that, oh, because I was anxious, it helped me prepare, and that's why the meeting went well. However, there is also a possibility, without getting anxious, if I had prepared well, then also the meeting could have gone fine, right? So, this belief is quite unhelpful. If we say that anxiety helps me in preparation, that maintains anxiety. That will, then we will not let go of anxiety. So, it kind of becomes a comfort zone if we have this unhelpful belief. The biggest myth of all: having anxiety or any other mental health issue means I'm weak. That is the biggest myth. Would we say that these all are weak individuals? Kim Kardashian, Adele, Selena Gomez, Lady Gaga, etc., Hrithik Roshan, Deepika Padukone, Anushka Sharma, Karan Johar, and recently MS Dhoni also spoke about, some of his team players that needed help with mental health issues. Now, would you say that any of those individuals are weak? I mean, look at their success in life. How can a weak individual be so successful? So, this is the biggest myth and very, very detrimental to to ourselves. To kind of not have that compassion for ourselves. So, no, having anxiety does not mean that you are weak, okay? Or other people who have anxiety does not mean that they are weak. So, let's come to the good news. The good news is that anxiety is treatable, and anxiety disorders are highly treatable. It's just that a lot of people don't want to take treatment for that, right? Either because of, they feel like they're going, if they take treatment, they're going to be interpreted as being weak individuals, or it's because of social stigma. There could be different reasons, but in actuality they are highly treatable, and people feel so much better after taking treatment. And we don't have to go through years and years and years of treatment to be able to see results. Even short term therapy like CBT, ACT are highly effective in helping people with anxiety or anxiety disorders. And the most important good news, the relief begins when we start understanding our anxiety better. When we are able to recognize anxiety, and we are able to recognize these thoughts and beliefs in ourselves that maintain our anxiety, relief begins then. And then the recovery becomes, the journey becomes much easier. So what can we start doing from now? How can we not become victim of our anxiety anymore? So I'm sharing some um, strategies with you that hopefully you'll be able to try out in your life and see if that works for you. Of course, it's not like one size fits all, so you'll have to give some of them a bit, a little bit of more try than others. And these are also skills. I would like to see them as skills. It's not like, after seeing this, you're done. Nothing happens without a little bit of effort. And once you put in even just a little bit of effort, you will see how much difference it can make. The reason I can say that so confidently, because I have done this myself. Most psychologists have to go through this kind of process for themselves to be able to understand the process much better. So um, listen to these with an open mind and see what you can use in your life. What we resist persists. Simply put, if we suppress, if we resist our anxiety, it increases. Okay, if I tell myself, don't be anxious, don't think about it, forget about it, or if I'm using excessive distraction, the chances are that my anxiety will increase over time. It's almost like nobody in the history of calming down calmed down by saying, calm down. You see, so um, some psychologists also believe that actually anxiety is not the problem. You know, anxiety is not the problem. The problem is getting scared of anxiety or having anxiety about anxiety. So, how that works is that when anxiety shows up, we get scared. We're like, oh, this is anxiety. We try to get rid of it. We fight with it. It's like having a, tug of war with a monster. As you can see in the picture, I'm having a tug of war with the monster of anxiety, with my monster of anxiety, and I wanted to fall in the hot lava, right? Now, the more I try to push it into hot lava, or the more I try to get rid of it, the more it pulls me back. So that's an exhausting exercise. It takes away all your energy, and instead, if we were to focus our energy on something more helpful, that will help us better. It's like, when there is darkness in the room, we don't fight with it, we don't try to pull the darkness away, we simply switch on the light. Yeah, so instead of resisting our anxiety, we if we kind of learn to tolerate it, how to observe it, to be curious about it, to be able to hold it, you know um, maybe name it, be a little bit more comfortable about it, then the chances are that we'll be able to work with it. We'll be able to help ourselves much better. For example, it's just a simple example of how we can kind of observe it. So if I start to get anxious, I could recognize that anxiety and say, oh, here comes my life is ruined story that my mind is trying to convince me of. So that's a simple example of how we can learn in simple ways to tolerate and observe our anxiety. Now, the beauty of this technique is that once we start doing that, once we start becoming a little bit more comfortable with it, not trying to suppress it, repress it, get rid of it, the monster becomes smaller and smaller. Right? Now, that's the paradox. It is true. If you can try it out for yourself, the more we try to push the beach ball in the water, the more with more force it comes back. And same is the nature of our minds and our thoughts. Empathy or kindness, talking to oneself like I was talking to my best friend. How would I talk to my best friend? With a lot of empathy, There's a lot of kindness, it's going to be fine, or um, that's okay to feel this way, it's all right. That is a very, very powerful tool. The the compassion, sometimes we feel that, oh, if I'm compassionate makes me weak. It's actually quite the opposite. Being compassionate is a very, very powerful state, and it gives a lot of strength to each one of us. And really, compassion is who we are at the end of the day. That's what gives our life a meaning. So having empathy for myself will also mean to understand that, look, I am not my anxiety. My life is not defined by just my anxiety. There is so much more to my life than just this anxiety. What are my strengths? What am I good at? What are the things that I do well? So I, the being, I am separate from my anxiety, is also an example of having empathy or kindness for myself. Or if you were to look at others, they are not just a they're not defined by their anxiety. There's a lot more than anxiety to their life. So keeping in mind that having empathy and kindness towards oneself is extremely important in looking after our minds well, which can really help in managing or coping with anxiety. Let's look at the role of the intellect. Now, quickly, this we covered in the previous presentation, the nature of our minds, but quickly, the job of the mind is to actually generate thoughts. So it doesn't stop, it's constantly generating thoughts. The job of the intellect is to see what thoughts are right for me, what thoughts are not so right for me. So, judging. So, the power of judgment lies with the intellect. So, how we can use the intellect is to actually sit back and see which thoughts or beliefs are helpful and which thoughts and beliefs are not helpful. So, fear in this respect would be false evidence appearing real, and the intellect helps us to identify, you know, that evidence which appears real but it's actually not real. So, if you were to check how much of my behavior is motivated by fear, is to check the kind of thoughts like, if I don't do this, this will happen. You know, the kind of messages that sometimes we get as forward. If you don't forward this to 10 people, something bad is going to happen to you. Yeah, so these are the kind of thoughts that can also contribute to anxiety, and the role of the intellect is to judge whether or not this evidence is false or true. Okay, so how do we use the intellect in specifically, in targeting our anxiety? One of the examples that I can give you is of a thought record. So you can actually use this for yourself every day if you like. So you can make a column of situation, thoughts, emotions, behavior. Okay, so let me give you a quick example. So I walk in front of a group of people. The thoughts that I have, they are talking about, one of the thoughts that I have, they are talking about me. Emotions related to that: anger, anxious, fear. Okay. Behaviors: avoid them, have difficulty performing at work. Now, the role of the intellect here is that the intellect can actually help me generate an alternative thought. What are the other explanations for this behavior? How can I think about it differently? Okay, so the intellect can identify, hey, this thought is not very helpful. It's making me feel anxious. So what could be the alternative thought? So they could be talking about something else. I could even ask them later, what they were talking about. So these are the kind of alternative thoughts that the intellect can help in generating to actually help with anxiety. Now, if you notice, the question is not whether this is true or not, because that's never the question. It could be true, it could not be true. The question is this thought helpful for me? Is this thought contributing to my anxiety? And my aim is to manage my anxiety, right? My aim is not to make other people stop thinking what they want to think. That is not the aim. The aim is to manage my anxiety, and hence I use my intellect to generate alternate thoughts. The next strategy is enhancing the art of observation and letting go. The reason I use the word enhancing is because this capacity exists within all of us, okay, whether we realize it or not. We all know that all our thoughts is are not equal to reality. You know, I could have 70,000 thoughts in a day, which might not portray what actually the reality is. And if I look at it deeply, I will realize all, I don't actually act upon all my thoughts. If there are 70,000 thoughts, I don't have 70,000 behaviors corresponding to those thoughts, which means that I actually have the capacity to let go of thoughts. I have that within me. It's just that when I'm in that moment of anxiety, that capacity reduces. I become inflexible about that capacity. So, if we were to enhance that capacity, you know, of observation of our own thoughts and letting go, then managing anxiety becomes a lot easier. In this respect, I want to explain a little bit about the observing self, or using detachment. Now, I think Indian psychology was the first paradigm which was brave enough to use the word observing self slash soul slash spirit slash our essence. Yeah, that again, just a bit of repetition here, that I, the being, I am not my anxiety, I am not my thoughts. I have thoughts. I have the capacity to observe my thoughts, which means that this is I, and these are my thoughts. Yeah, so there's a little bit of a difference between who I am and my thoughts. So using the observing self, the part of me that has the capacity to observe, or in other words, it could also be called the art of detachment. Now, sometimes detachment is a highly misinterpreted word. You know, detachment. If you think about detachment, it means a recluse, sannyasi. You know, doesn't want to engage. Actually, or emotional numbness. It doesn't mean emotional numbness, or any of those things. Detachment actually is a very, very powerful skill. You know, um, the reason why psychological therapy is effective, one of the reasons, is because the psychologist is actually detached from the thoughts and the experiences of the other person, and hence is able to see it in a different light. So it's a very, very powerful skill. You know, it tells us so much about ourselves. If we were to, just one day, just for fun, do an exercise for even half an hour, just sit and observe what goes on around you without trying to change it, without intervening, watching your family members, watching your children, watching anyone, watching your teachers. Just observe non-judgmentally, if possible. Just watch them. I can assure you, that uh, it's going to tell you so much about yourself and so much about other people. So it's actually a very useful skill, which is kind of same as using the observing self, that I become the observer of my thoughts. That that I create a little bit of distance from who I am and my thoughts. So one of the techniques of using a detachment is called, it could be called hooking versus unhooking. Now, when, for example, when I'm hooked onto a thought, I think first of all that this thought is absolutely true, right? So for instance, I am going to fail. When I'm hooked onto this thought, I'm going to fail, I leave no possibility. I truly believe that I'm going to fail, which means that I have become one with my thought. However, if I just detach a little bit and I say to myself, I'm having a thought that I'm going to fail, what that gives us a sense of a different possibility, that yes, I'm having this thought, this might be true, but this might not be true. Whereas in hooking, there is no other possibility. The mind believes that this is absolutely true. So, and this activity we did in the previous presentation as well. So, saying to yourself, I am having a thought that, and then, entering that thought, saying that thought, I am having a thought that I am going to fail, feels far better than I'm going to fail. Because that gives a little bit of space, a little bit of um, what do you say, a possibility of another reality happening. um, Next, I want to talk a little about the power of meditation in helping us to use our observing self, helping us to enhance the capacity of detachment. So, meditation, if we think about where does meditation fit into psychology, then let me tell you that meditation is being used in very very powerful ways, nationally, internationally, all across the globe, for in psychology paradigms, especially in therapy. And psychologists are starting to realize, that that's hey, spirituality and meditation are is not something that is separate from our life. you know Psychology is about knowing more about myself, and trying to live the best that I can. And spirituality and meditation are such an integral part of it that it's just impossible to kind of say that, oh, the psychology is separate and spirituality is separate. No, it's the way, that we humans like to live. Especially in acceptance and commitment therapy, if you see, they acknowledge that we've taken the inspiration is Buddhism. So the meditation is basically Buddhist inspired meditation. So we are kind of, just becoming more and more sensitive to how we function as human beings, and how we are actually, um, you know, we can't really separate the two, spirituality and psychology. It's who we are, whether we kind of acknowledge it or not. Now, let me give you a little story that I really liked, which kind of gives a sense of what I'm talking about. So, there was a conference um, on whether God exists or not. So, a lot of intellectuals came and they spoke about their views. Some said God does not exist and they had their own theories. Some said God exists and they had their own theories. Now, the coordinator of the conference, finally it was kind of concluded that, okay, fine, God does not exist. So, most of the people agreed with that theory. Now, the coordinator of the conference In his concluding remarks, he said that, okay, so we have established that God does not exist. Thank God it did not rain during the conference. I thought that it was going to rain and ruin everything. So you see that, we as intellectuals sometimes can become so caught up in, what is evidence based, and what is research based. Well, of course, meditation is research based, and it has shown its effectiveness, but the point that I'm trying to make is that meditation and spirituality, are a part of who we are, whether we realize it or not. It's like, if I'm feeling extremely upset, if I'm and if I'm uh, motivated to go to the church or a temple, or spiritual institution, uh, I don't stop and say to myself or think, oh, is this research based? Is it, has it proven its effectiveness yet? No, because I'm naturally, intuitively kind of motivated towards that, and I know that that's going to help me, right? So, and we are just starting to become a bit more sensitive towards these processes. So, let's experiment with meditation today, and let's try and see if we can um, kind of integrate in our life this kind of meditation that we are about to do, and see if we like it and see if it helps. So I'd like you to find a comfortable spot where you won't be disturbed for the next few minutes. With an open mind, just simply listen to what I say and follow as much as you can. There is no right or wrong in this. So just go with the flow. It may also be helpful to focus your attention in the center of your forehead and experience oneself as a spiritual being. So imagine this beautiful light coming out of your forehead. Your inner consciousness. Now bring your attention to the sounds in your environment. Sounds happening in your immediate environment, whatever they may be. People talking, TV, AC, fan, and just observe these sounds without trying to control them, just being an observer. It may also be helpful to say I am observing the sound of people talking. I, the being, am observing the sound of the fan. Now gently bring your attention to the sounds that are or may be happening in the distant environment. Maybe the sounds of vehicles or people talking from far away. Birds chirping, and just silently observe. Now gently bring your attention to your breathing, just observing your breath as it is. Without trying to change it, just notice how it is going in and out and has a rhythm. Now gently bring your attention to your thoughts. Your thoughts could be about anything, about the day to day, about this presentation, about what you're going to do next. Now imagine that there's a beautiful river flowing, and the river has some leaves flowing. So just watch those leaves as they come and go. And now, if it feels okay for you, imagine that each thought that you're having is appearing on the leaf that is coming and it gently flows. So every leaf that you see has your thought or image, and you are observing those thoughts as they come and go. If you get carried away with a particular thought, that's quite okay. As soon as you realize that you got carried away with a particular thought, just gently bring your attention back to the exercise and start observing the flow again. So the river with leaves and your thoughts flowing on the leaves. Just do that for a few more moments. Now gently bring your focus back in the center of your forehead and imagine this beautiful white light spreading everywhere. And imagine this beautiful white and golden light coming from above and just falling on every part of your body, giving you that sense of warmth and safety. And you start to feel protected and safe. This light is soothing every part of your body and mind. And is making you feel so safe and protected. And now gently wriggle your toes, move your legs, move your arms a bit, and come back. So, this is the kind of meditation that you could possibly practice, and with practice, it becomes like a skill that you can use even for anxiety provoking situations. Imagine the thoughts flowing in the river, on the leaves, to get that sense of detachment from them. And you would realize that the more and more you practice this skill, the better and better you're able to manage your thoughts and feelings about um, having anxiety. Now, just a little note on when to take professional help. So please contact your doctor or a mental health professional if your anxiety is affecting your work, relationships, other areas of your life, like your life goals, and make you miss out on the life that you desire. Or if you've had anxiety for a really long time and you've tried a lot of things and it seems to be getting worse, or not much improvement can be seen. Or if you have felt sad, lost interest in enjoyable activities for more than 2 weeks, or have had self-harm or suicidal thoughts at any point in time. Also, it would be a good idea to seek professional help if you would like more support and information for yourself or someone that you know, or if you feel that some of the things that I spoke to you about today could be helpful to you, but you possibly needed more practice or more understanding, then that would be a good idea, to take professional help. So with that, I'd like to end the presentation, and thank you everybody for joining me today. And I hope this was helpful and you could take some of the things and use it in your day-to-day life and see how can it work for you. All the very best.